Hello guys and welcome back to another solo podcast. Today we are going to go through again Instagram Q&A with some fantastic questions that I got through. Please be warned, if I do look down at my piece of paper here, it is purely to write down the time at which I answered the question. So therefore I can effectively put timestamps into this podcast because a lot of people have been requesting timestamps. I appreciate as well if you ask a specific question and this podcast goes on for an hour, there you want to find your question. You would maybe don't want to listen to everyone's question, so you can now do that with the magic pink pen that I have in my hand. So yeah, let's crack into things. First things first, a little bit of an update on myself. Obviously a big week for me last week. Very surreal moment training with Jordan. That was basically like my Christmas, birthday, lifetime present, all wrapped into one. If it could have been that, obviously it wasn't a present. But if someone could have bought me something, that would have been pretty damn fucking cool. So I don't know whether Jordan realizes how much that kind of meant to me, that session. I'm pretty sure he does because I was in awe the whole time. And also so nervous that I managed to get my age completely wrong. And he managed to also call me a powerlifter, not a bodybuilder. So if anyone's watched the full video, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. So if you have watched that, I hope you've enjoyed it. And I appreciate anyone that has signed up to the site. We are just about to clear 500 members. So I'm really stoked about this because that for me just shows that the site itself is a fantastic portion of what I do. It's an exciting prospect and it's something that I'm just super excited, again, just to grow, make bigger, and get more people on it. Got some cool sessions coming up, which I'll definitely be recording. The opportunities that I have with Lucas in my corner as well, who's a fantastic addition to not only my business, but he's also a fantastic friend. He's one of my Birmingham friends. I don't have many, but he's definitely one of my closest. So I love Lucas. I'm not sure if he'll listen to this, but he's a superb guy, and I'm just blessed to have him in my life. I'm blessed to have the people that I have in my life at the moment. And I think this is something super key, and it's something that I'm talking a lot about with my clients at the moment in terms of creating your circle and making sure your circle's super strong and everyone in it that you feel like they should be there for a reason. Not having any person there that you feel is potentially negatively affecting your life or what you do, they should be removed with immediate effect, in my opinion. As brutal as that sounds, but that's the way it is. I think you should just keep the people that matter, keep the people that are adding positively to your life and move on. So that was that. And then besides that, I'm taking a deload, 4 days off, a la Cliff Wilson, Valentin Tambosi kind of style, as some people have attributed to, which is true. It's one of sort of Cliff's methods of deloading, which I kind of like. For me, going into sessions from an aspect of trying to deload and back off my volume, back off my intensity, I'd simply rather not go. I'd rather not be there. I'd rather not be in the gym at that point. I don't mind going in for some light cardio, which I may do this evening. Currently recording this at about 4:20. I've got some consultations and check-ins left for the day, but may go in later just to do some light movement and get moving a little bit, but that's the majority of my expenditure. I just can't cope with going in and doing a half-hour session. I mean, today, Jordan and Corin were in there, and if I was deloading, that session would have soon turned into a non-deload session. So that just shows how my psyche is not suited to going in and doing deload sessions. I had thought about the approach of dropping back my volume and just doing top sets, but I think my neurological capacity or my state neurologically needs a deload. I need to deload from a neurological and physical aspect. So I will be deloading. This is my first day off. I will take days off all the way up until Saturday. This is my word on that front, and then Sunday will be my first session back. I will train pull. I'll be back into my pull push leg cycle, which was working really, really well, and then I will lead that up all the way pretty much until I go away to Vienna with Danny for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. the day after Valentine's. So we'll go up there. I'll take the Thursday off most likely, then train pull, push, and legs all in Vienna. Come back on the Monday and obviously rest up. And hopefully by that point we'll have got some productive sessions and some more PBs in, with me being back into sync with things with the first 3 sessions, which I'll take. If their PB is there for the taking in the second or third session, I'll take them. But in the first session back, I will definitely be taking it a little easier, just to ease myself back in. I've done it before where I've just gone in like a bull in a china shop, and it doesn't work out too well. So that is a brief update on me. So that has ended at 5 minutes and 40 seconds. So we'll get into the first question of the Q&A. If you could train with one bodybuilder from any point in time in their prime, who and why? Really good question, this, Matthew. I take most of these questions, by the way, and any that I do need to do more research on, I do the research. But obviously the easier ones I'll just answer straight off the bat. So yeah, Matthew, I think I would have to answer. My answer would be, if I hadn't already trained with Jordan, it would hands down be Jordan. But besides that, I think it would just have to be Ronnie. It would just have to be Ronnie or Dorian. It's either Ronnie or Dorian, but it's so hard, because for me, seeing Dorian's intensity would be absolutely insane. I'd love to do that. Seeing the forced reps with Leroy and things like that, I'd love that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, I'd want to see Ronnie, because I want to see someone squat what Ronnie did or pull what Ronnie did. So yeah, for me, it would be either one of those two. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. So moving on, what do you think about eating fruit at night or the post-workout meal to add some more carbs? So I don't have any issues with fruits as a post-workout meal, or an addition. You won't have fruit on its own for a post-workout meal. Don't have any issues with fruit for an addition to a post-workout meal. Don't have any issues with fruit at night. I mean, my question to you, Stefan, would really be, why do you think fruit's an issue? What's the issue with fruit? If we look into the antioxidants present in fruit, of course, some people shun fruit in the post-workout window because from an antioxidant profile, we're potentially diminishing the inflammatory response to training, which is obviously something we want. We don't want to bring down inflammation in that moment of time. We want to actually have the inflammation there to create a response, to create adaptation, to create more muscle growth. But I don't think there's enough antioxidants in fruit to be able to worry, or in the quantity that you'll be having of fruit, to be worried about the effects on inflammation in that window of time. So I don't mind fruit whatsoever. I think that more bodybuilders should be having fruit. I think that we can gain a wide diversity of micronutrients from fruit. And I think that they should be present in everyone's diet in a nice degree of variety and diversity also. Some of my favourites are mainly the frozen variety, even the cold winter months. There's just something about them that tastes nice, it makes you feel good, and generally they go well with most meals. So they seem to be the most preferable as well for us because they keep for the longest. I don't have to worry about the freshness, etc. So yeah, that's my go-to. Right, so Joe, your question is, let me just log the time. So Joe, your question is pull, push, leg split over a bro split. So why do I pick that? So if we look at the basic reasons as to why we're going to pick push-pull legs over a bro, is primarily from a frequency standpoint. So if we look at how many times we can train a muscle group over a week, and we have a little look into the research in terms of the study that matched volume over the course of a week. So over the course of a microcycle, people performed the same degree of volume, but they had one group which trained all the volume for one body part in one session versus all the volume for the body parts in 2 separate sessions. And ultimately, the 2 separate sessions were getting a greater hypertrophic response. Excuse me for jumping over my words. The hypertrophy response was better in the 2 groups, or the groups that split, primarily because if you look at performing volume, the more that you do in one session, the likelihood of your junk volume rising is high. So by the end of your bro session, Joe, or any of your body part sessions where you're training one body part, at any point do you start to feel like the volume you're performing is not as productive as the start of the session? There's most likely a scenario in some of your workouts where that's the case. And that's where you need to start pulling the plug on a bro split and potentially splitting your volume across the course of the week. Of course, again, as you get stronger, your ability to go into these sessions and progress is dropping. So when you are on a split which requires maybe more volume, but also you're strong, splitting your volume across multiple sessions is going to be key. So definitely, I think that any level of trainee should be splitting their volume. Funny story, actually, I trained with one of my clients, Martin, and he came up, and I'm not actually doing anything with Martin's training at all. It's one of my only clients where I do this for a few reasons. He's actually just a close friend also who came to one of my seminars. Now, the thing is with Martin is before he came up, he was doing like basically the standard leg session where you do like 3 or 4 sets of squat, 3 or 4 sets of leg press, 3 or 4 sets of leg curls, basically 4 sets of everything. Sometimes he was even doing 5. So I said to him, I was like, I guarantee with execution absolutely nailed, you won't be doing any more than 2. Maybe 3 maximally, because I know he's a strong dude. So we went through the session, we went on to like the V squat second, and the place in which I positioned him and the way that he executed the set, he was buried after the second set. Done. Absolutely KO. Done. The thing is, he could then do the 2 sets, max intensity, max execution, and then go back in like 3 or 4 days' time when he's recovered from that amount of volume, because mainly volume is going to be our precursor for creating soreness, therefore creating a response in which we need to recover, therefore creating an environment where by the next session we're maybe not ready to train. Our readiness to train is largely dictated by intensity of effort, but also volume. So if he was only performing 2 sets, and then later into the week he could perform the other 2 sets, both with perfect execution, I think he's going to grow much better. So, and in one session I managed to convince Martin that after we've done with this prep phase, which is pretty close to his show, hence why I'm not going to change his training now, I'm going to take over his training. So it's I think that, you know, most bodybuilders will respond better when they split their volume over the course of the week as opposed to doing it in one single session. But of course, everyone's very individual, Joe, so you might respond better to a bro split, and that's absolutely fine. But I highly encourage you to maybe think about splitting your volume across the week. So then we're going to go on to mini cuts. So how aggressive? Should we use all our tools? What percentage of calories should we cut at? Thank you. Okay, so Coolin, I think it's Coolin Kearns. So my answer to your question is very determined to the individual. Mini cuts as a whole should be aggressive. So we should be trying to diet off body fat as quickly as we possibly can in the mini cut phase, because the whole goal with most mini cuts is to extend the gaining phase. So with that being said, if we were to take it steady or take it slow with a mini cut, we are wasting our fucking time. Seriously. So you need to get in and get out with a mini cut. In terms of percentage of calories reduction, like, I don't really work off percentages, but I definitely go into something like 1,000 calorie deficit for a mini cut. And it depends, again, the individual. I'm not doing a lot of mini cuts with females at the moment because I find that the stress response to a harsh deficit amongst most females is not good, and we tend to see some sort of wacky data go on with the scale. It's just something that I've observed recently. If you're a coach and you listen to this and you're nodding your head, please comment in the comment section agreeing with me, because I've found weird correlations with putting females through aggressive fat loss phases and just not getting the response that I want. So yeah, that's what I would say, is that be careful if you are a female and you're going through a mini cut. Maybe perhaps consider a slightly longer fat loss phase to get the job done. I think they can work. You just have to be very careful with how you're going about it. Especially if you've recently dieted, which unfortunately a lot of females try and do that, and it's not going to work out well. But for males, you can pretty much go in gun-ho, get 1,000 calorie deficit in, get the body weight off at probably a closer rate of loss of like 2% a week. So for example, if I was looking to mini cut now, I'm about 185 pounds, I'd look to almost lose like £4 a week, £3 or £4 a week, and that's the very upper end. And at that point, of course, some performance might be lost. Our goal would be to retain as much as we can, but some performance may be lost in that phase, and that's something you'll have to admit. Defeat on. Cool. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, when it comes to sort of picking or having a macronutrient setup for a mini cut, we're looking at pulling pretty much primarily fats and carbohydrates. Protein stays static. Get fats down as low as possible, so around that 0.8 grams per kilogram mark, and then carbohydrates, just cut them as much as you need to create that caloric deficit. JJF training. So your question is tips on balancing work, life, training, and downtime. You seem to be a master at this, sir. Thank you very much for that comment. That means a lot in terms of, from the outside looking in, me looking like someone that manages my balance well. That's cool, because I don't think that I'd have got that comment like even a year ago. So a year ago, I didn't have a relationship. I was very much at home. At the time, I was pretty much just with my dad. And my balance was non-existent, really. One of my best friends at the time, Jack Piad, had started a contest prep, so we weren't going out much at all. We weren't sort of going to the cinema or bowling or going out for food anymore. So my balance was whack. In terms of how I developed that, honestly, I think getting into a relationship changes things a lot. So not that you should search for one to create balance in your life. Perhaps you should look at spending more time with family, creating options for you guys to maybe, go on holiday with your parents or do something with your brother or sister if you have siblings. I just think that more people need to admit that nothing's going to happen with balance unless you actually do something about it. So the reason why I seem to have a bit of balance is because I do shit about it. Last Friday when we went out to the cinema, I just sort of said to Danny, do you want to do something tonight? Do you want to go to the cinema? We did. I guess that's a degree of balance, right? Coming away from bodybuilding, coming away from work a bit. And even that couple of hours spent in the cinema away from work, away from my phone, is huge for me, because the next morning I came back and I did one of my clients, one of Connor's check-ins, and I did it, and I was like, that was a really good check-in. And I sent it across, and his response was like, that was one of the best check-ins you've ever done. That was one of the most informative, best check-ins. I really loved that one. And the thing is, if I don't take my foot off the gas from a training or a work aspect, I see my ability to give out good quality content and good quality feedback for my clients, I see it start to diminish. I really do. So remember that you can be a workhorse. I love being a workhorse. Today, I'm going to be a workhorse. I'm going to get all my stuff done, and I don't care how long it takes me. I'm fine being a workhorse. I can do that. But having some degree of balance, like next week, we're going to Vienna, I will definitely drop off my workload a bit in that period of time. I will enjoy some meals out and enjoy some time away. And then these things are super important for your ability to come back and light the gas pedal again. So yeah, I think create your own balance. So plan stuff. Go out somewhere, go on holiday somewhere, plan it. Don't expect for it to come to you. And realize that when you're doing it, don't feel bad about doing it, because you know that actually it's bringing you a lot of positive stuff. It's not bringing you a negative. The people that don't enjoy doing stuff outside of the gym are the people that always worry about the negatives that come with it, which is maybe getting behind on a bit of work or behind on a session of training, and they don't realize that the positives that can come with that. James, so you ask about being in a 1,000 calorie deficit. Aim for 1 PR on main exercise per session, or another suggestion. So if you're in a deficit, you shouldn't change your psyche when it comes to training. So just because you're in a deficit, that doesn't mean that you can't look to progress. Just because you're in a deficit, it doesn't mean you can't aim to PR. Yes, you're in a large deficit. Yes, the likelihood of progression is lower, but you can still aim to go in the gym and have progressive overload occur, especially if you're the start of a deficit or you're up at higher set point in terms of body fat. This is a really big realization for most, because what most do wrong is that they set the idea in their head that when they're in a deficit, they're not going to progress. When they're in a deficit, their training is going to go to shit. That's not what's going to happen. Like, don't focus on that. Focus on the potential to actually overload. Focus on trying to string together some really good productive sessions. Don't focus on like what could go wrong. Focus on what could potentially go right here. What I like to do, and this is actually again something I was talking about with a client the other day, is when I'm in a deficit, I like to pretend I'm not. And when I'm in an off season, I like to pretend like I'm like almost superhuman. Like I like to pretend like everyone says all these things like, oh, like naturals are weaker and things like that. So like just block the idea of like being weak and natty out of your head. Like, I'm not saying be assisted. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like why stop yourself at the point that, oh, okay, I'm natural, so I'm gonna be weak. Nah. There's plenty of naturals out there that are super strong. So look up to those people. Don't look up to like, don't think just because like you're in a deficit or just because you're drug free you're gonna be weak. I hate that so much. And I see it fairly frequently, where people think they're limited by where they're at. Don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself whatsoever. Set incredibly high boundaries and expectations for yourself. And I think these will come and thank you in the future when you're returned with high levels of muscle mass, because you set your goals so incredibly high. Louis, so I'm a new follower of yours. Sorry, Louis, I'm going to have to ditch your question because I've already answered it. How aggressive should a mini cut be? Rate of loss. I've pretty much already covered that question. So Louis, hopefully I answered that in the mini cut question at 13 minutes. So Farziz, I hope I said that correctly, dude. So your question is, how long of a rest should you have between between a top set and a back off? My answer for that question is, I think you should have as long as you possibly need between those two sets. Those two sets, your top and your back off, are absolutely everything for that session. They're everything. Like, those two sets should be the sets that you go to bed at night really looking forward to. Those two sets should be the ones that, when you look at your logbook and you think about how you're going to progress them, should scare the living crap out of you. Those are the ones where you grab your mate because you know you're going to need a spotter. And then those are the ones where you've got to walk around the gym, pace around the gym a bit, look at the machine, look at the barbell, look at the weights, and think I'm going to fucking dominate them. Like, those are those sets. So how do you think you're going to attack both of those with the same degree of intensity and focus if you were to time your rest periods? The answer to that question is you wouldn't. You wouldn't attack them with the same level of focus, the same level of intensity, the same degree of want and need to absolutely dominate that work set. And this is what I saw again, and I wasn't surprised at all, because I knew how hard he trained and I knew what his psyche was like. But again, Jordan would just prioritize rest the entire session. In between sets, he'd either sit down or wait or take a breather, or take as much time as he needs. And he'd take as many warm-up sets as he needed. Absolutely rinse warm-up sets. Absolutely rinse rest. There is, of course, an upper ceiling to this. You can rest for too long, and the movement in your head becomes less ingrained than it was on the top set. That's why you do your acclimating sets up to your top set, because without them, you wouldn't be neurologically fired and ready to go. So if you rest for too long between your top and your back off, you're going to have the same issue where you've neurologically switched the fuck off. And you can't afford for that to happen. So you need to be in a position where you maximize your rest period enough to perform well, but you need to take those sets like they are absolutely everything. And you really need to like put that at the top of your mind. And that needs to be the primary focus. Okay? So, next question. this one's from Ola, and he asks about shit sleep advice and Nocturia. I'm 18 years old. So, for those that don't know, and again, full closure, I didn't know what Nocturia means until I got this question, which is great because it means I learned something. So, Nocturia is actually just basically waking up frequently in the night to urinate. There can be a number of factors. Obviously, age can have an impact on this, which is probably why Ola mentioned his age. In this moment of time, obviously, age isn't not the factor at play with Ola. It could be an existing condition, which he may well know himself. But also, I think there's a lot of ways that you can sort of micromanage this yourself without having to do anything much different to what you're currently doing with regards to like supplements or medication or anything like that. So interventions can obviously include managing your caffeine intake throughout the day so that when you start sort of excreting fluid, you're not either dehydrated or just generally having too much caffeine throughout the day. Then we're also looking at like fluid intake pre-bed. So in the pre-bed window, are we having like too much liquid with our last meal? Is our last meal fairly liquid dense? There's numerous factors at play here that can influence how many times you wake up throughout the night. So I would say limit your fluid intake and try and stop drinking sort of 2 hours pre-bed. If you can do that, I think that will set you up better for a full night of sleep. And then prior to that, I think your routine is the most fundamental factor. I've talked about sleep a lot on the podcast, but your routine is literally the number one factor. So try and get into a habitual routine of having a set time for your bed, a set time for when you go to sleep, a set time for when you go to get to wake because setting up yourself from a circadian rhythm perspective in a way that promotes rhythm is key. Without a rhythm, without a routine, you're going to be a little bit lost and a little bit all over the place. So I think rhythm and routine is key. And then just making sure that from a bedroom position, you're not spending a large amount of time in your bedroom throughout the day doing tasks that are anything to do with not sleeping. So like working in your bedroom, eating in your bedroom, or doing anything that's ideally just not sleeping. Avoid, because you're going to create a weird connotation with the bedroom itself. Should be for sleeping, not for working, or anything like that. So yeah, create the relationship with going to bed there, and that's it. I find a lot of people work in their bedrooms, and I don't think it's a good thing. I used to do it, and it's not a good thing at all. I think that the best my sleep has been is where I have a designated work environment, a designated sleep environment. So yeah, think about your environment, think about your pre-bed water intake, think about your routine. There's a load of other stuff that I could go into, but for now, I'll leave you with that. And then if you have any sort of questions you want to specifically DM me about, then go for it, dude. So then we have Macy, who asks, is it alright to feel quite fatigued in the evenings only 2 to 3 weeks into my meso? The logbook is still increasing. So, the thing is with this, right, is you're not going to feel fresh all the time. And with you being 2 weeks into your meso, you've surpassed that first initial week of potentially more of an intro week, gathering up your senses, understanding where you're really going to be from a strength perspective after your deload, how you're going to respond to some of the new movements that you've put into your new mesocycle. So from a neurological perspective, you're potentially a little bit fresher. And then coming into the second week, you're going to be pushing a little bit harder, and you're also going to be trying to beat your week 1 numbers with these new movements. So both physically and neurologically, you're going to be in a position where you are more fatigued. So week 2 in a mesocycle, feeling fatigued in the evenings is like pretty standard, to be honest, for the way that I program. Obviously, some people titrate up volume, so in being fatigued and to the point where it's affecting your energy throughout like the evening day might be an issue for people who are titrating volume, because obviously week 4 and week 5 is meant to be overloading in terms of sets, but I don't tend to do that, which is actually one of the other questions which I'll cover later. But if you're not titrating volume, you're keeping volume static, or at least your way of progressing volume is not through sets, but it's more through achieving an extra rep or adding loading, then I think you'd be fine to feel fatigued week 2 into a mesocycle. And I think that, like, if anything, the signs that you're feeling fatigued is actually just a sign that you are probably training quite hard. And in that case, kudos, keep it up. Because, like, ultimately creating an adaptation is not going to be a smooth, easy ride. I think far too many people think that creating an adaptation from a muscular standpoint is going to be super easy, and that you're not going to feel tired or sore, or that soreness is a bad thing, or that if you feel fatigued or run down you need a deload and you're overreached. I think far too many people cry, moan, and I'm not saying you are, by the way, dude, before I say this, but I think people cry, moan and bitch too much about feeling tired, when in reality, like, look, like, you've just started getting going. Deal with your recovery as best as you possibly can. Influence recovery in a positive fashion. So manage your sleep, manage your hydration, manage your external stresses. Keep the focus and the intent on recovering just as hard as you train, and I think you'll reap further progressions as you move forwards. So yeah, like, keep just the focus, the goal to progress, and make sure you're managing all your external variables, and I think you'll be fine. Fatigue is one of the factors that will influence your ability to add on new muscle tissue. You can't create a stressor with no stress. Do you get what I mean? So hopefully that answers your question, dude. So the next question is coming from Harry. So Harry is one of my clients. Harry is on a quest to learn more, and I love that about Harry. So he always asks plenty of questions in check-ins, and even double crosses myself on some stuff. So Harry, if you're listening to this, dude, I love you for that, matey. You make me think about what I do, and that's a really good attribute of a client, so thank you. So essentially, you ask about hip thrusting. Why don't I rate heavy hip thrusts anymore? Why don't I do them? So, in my opinion, the cost-benefit analysis of a hip thrust is not really in our favor of selecting the exercise. The reason why is because we're creating quite a bit of axial loading to a degree. Obviously, we're not primarily loading the lower back, but we are to a degree loading the erectors. Therefore, we do have some axial loading from the hip thrust. Therefore, if we look at the loading potential for the exercise, we're creating quite a tax on the central nervous system, so our ability to therefore complete a lot of other compound-based exercises with the hip thrust in our programming, especially a barbell hip thrust loaded in heavy rep ranges, is diminished. And when I look at the bang for your buck, especially when how most people perform a hip thrust, if we look at like fully contracting the glutes and getting a really forceful confirmed contraction, are we always doing that with a hip thrust? I think people load them too heavy to be able to do that. I think people are throwing weight through thin air as opposed to actually utilizing their glute musculature to be able to do it. I always felt I felt a hip thrust in my glutes, but I found my glutes have grown far more by understanding what true hip extension feels like, because a lot of the time when you're doing a hip thrust, you don't get full peak hip extension, and you don't confirm a glute contraction, like I've said. So I would say that for you in your environment where you've not got a banded hip thrust setup or a booty builder like we have at Ultimate, which is basically a cable stack version of a hip thrust, when you haven't got that, replacing it with a glute kickback, or even for a stability standpoint, a Smith machine hip thrust, or just doing RDLs with a dominance of hip extension, again, potentially looking at hip banding it so that we're prioritizing the glutes at the peak range and learning how to fully contract our glutes. These would be planes of motion that I think would be more favorable for the glutes. But I don't think that I think the answer to the question doesn't mean that I don't rate a hip thrust. I think a hip thrust can still exist in programming. I just think that the cost for it in terms of setup time and how much we're potentially taxing our central nervous system for the benefits of the exercise, when we can get benefits from other exercises that take less setup time and tax the central nervous system less, it makes the exercise weigh it up. Like, it's not one that I put in a lot of programs nowadays. Harry also continues to ask, what's my opinions on RDLs to the knee, or, well, not to the knee. We'll never go to just to the knee with an RDL. I mean, I've looked at some of my footage before, and even, like, I'm not happy with the 200 I did. I'm not happy with the depth on that, to be honest. But the thing is, with an RDL, what we've got to look at is our ability to keep our thoracic tight and locked in. Once we lose our ability to keep our thoracic locked in, that's the point at which depth ends. Once we lose our upper back tightness, and it's not correlative with loading, we then cut range. That's where range stops, because that's the point at which we've got, ideally, maximal stretch on the hamstring without compromising our spine neutrality. Once we start to see a curve in the thoracic, so in the upper back, we lose stability of the barbell. We usually see a transfer of load to the wrong muscle groups. So we're demanding much more of the erectors as opposed to the hamstrings and glutes. We see a weakness at lockout. You know, if you ever have a really rounded thoracic at the phase at which you go above the knee on the deadlift, you're going to have a hard time locking that out, and that's why I struggle. So my thoracic is generally very strong, but the issue with my thoracic is it's always fatigued, because I do low bar squats, I do a lot of upper back movements in my pull days, and then I have a push day in between where I'm stabilizing all my dumbbell pressing with my upper back, my scapula, so, and forcing scapular retraction on all my pressing. So I think that you should take an RDL to as deep as you can without compromising a lot of your thoracic from a flexion standpoint. So if you're seeing a lot of thoracic flexion, you need to maybe look at your depth, or you maybe just need to look at your loading. And to be honest with you, Harry, I think the loading on that 200 set was too cocky. Not happy with the amount of range that I got on that, but I will fix that. You won't be seeing any sort of just below the knee RDLs from me. I'm a guy that likes to take an RDL not all the way to the floor, because I think that compromises the erectors a bit too much, especially when you're looking at maximally overloading an RDL. Yes, it's a really hard exercise to do, so you're certainly doing the hard stuff when you pause to the floor, and it is a great movement if you can remain neutral and you can keep everything tight, but it's so hard to do. Not many people can do that, buddy. So I think that if we can really load up a perfect barbell RDL with lovely eccentrics, a nice eccentric loading, ideally depth to mid-shin height, and that's awesome. That's great. That's where we want to be. Yeah? That makes sense? I think if that makes sense, then perfect. But that's just my opinions, of course. And Harry, you're entitled to question me on that one again. Question is on Yohimbine from JDF Fitness. So again, another question on Yohimbine. This is one I actually haven't covered, so I'm happy to cover this one. It's just on the timing Yohimbine. So I don't think there's anything that we need to sort of be too in depth with the timing of Yohimbine. Personally, I recommend to clients 20 minutes before cardio. I think that's an adequate time to be taking it. Again, with caffeine, ideally. That's perfect. That's perfect setup. I don't think you need to be stressing about being on the minute or on the hour with your Yohimbine. 20 minutes pre-CV, you should be fine. So, next question. Dan Max, thoughts on adding sets throughout a mesocycle or adding load? Is there a better or more optimal approach? Now, I don't think there's a better or more optimal approach to either. I think there's an approach that obviously works for some more than others, and some enjoy more than others. So this is sort of the open-mindedness that you've got to have when it comes to bodybuilding training, and this is something that maybe perhaps I don't know, maybe perhaps I don't do as well as I could, if maybe it's a downfall of myself, because if you were to ask what I would do for myself, it would always be adding load because I believe that the greatest stimulus we have to create an adaptation is mechanical tension. And with that being said, that means that we need to add load on the bar or the dumbbells or the cable stack every single time we can. Okay, and when we're adding sets, what happens generally with most people that can train hard is that they hit a wall really, really fast. And this usually exists, and when this happens, you seem to see a significant rise in the amount of junk volume that someone's doing. Okay, so at that point, we are really running into issues with providing an accurate and meaningful stimulus for hypertrophy. Let's just take Jordan, for example, okay? So Jordan's a great example. Imagine Jordan, someone who can train as hard as he can, which is very few humans on this planet. Imagine him adding sets to his protocol. And he's someone that trains super duper hard, so he's top of the tree, right? Imagine him adding sets. If he added sets every single week, he would be an absolute broken man by week 3. He'd be done. He'd be done in. I doubt he would leave his bed. He'd be that done in. Unless he managed to somehow reduce his output in terms of managing fatigue in every one of his sets so that he's training to a perceived RIR, which I don't think Jordan's going to be doing anytime soon. So if you can train anywhere near close to that intensity, I don't think adding sets is going to be your favorable approach. I think this enjoyment factor for you as a trainee will drop off quite fast, and you'll be performing junk volume in no time, and your enjoyment of the overall process will diminish, and that's generally just quite an upsetting point at which to be within your training. I think that's something that we should try to avoid as much as possible. Enjoyment of your training is a huge thing. So for me, it's always going to be adding load. It's always going to be adding reps or adding load, chasing mechanical tension, and not chasing volume as a precursor for hypertrophy. Of course, volume is a factor of hypertrophy, but if you get so strong, like, work this out, guys. I've added 20 kilos to my squat for pretty much matched reps in a 2-month period. I went from 180 for 10 to pretty much 200 for 10. I did the 180 for 10 in November, and that was hard. And I've gone now, like yesterday, I did 200 for 9. That's a large amount of volume added in that period of time. And that's just through what? Adding sets? No. If anything, I've reduced sets. I've just gotten stronger. And that's, ultimately, I think that's what's going to yield the best progress for most people. Next question. Top 4 exercises for back. So if we're looking at building density to your entire posterior chain, I think you absolutely need to do some form of deadlift variation. Whether that's pulling from the floor, whether that's controlling an eccentric on a rack dead and pulling in the rack. Not a huge fan of them, but I think they can do favors for back development if you're limited from the floor. Perhaps you've got a knee injury, a hip injury, something that limits you from pulling from the floor height. Rack pulls can be good as long as you control the eccentric. Rack pulls are not bad. They are bad when you perform them with a bounce and with inertia and with no control to the eccentric. They become an exercise that has pretty much a nil effect on hypertrophy. If anything, they're just battering up your central nervous system for no degree of hypertrophic stimulus. So for me, I think you need to pull from the floor, pull from the rack, do an RDL variation, primary goal for back. That may cause some hissy fits among some people who don't think that deadlifts build your back, but I think anecdotally, if you look at the best backs ever, they probably all pulled. And then you look at something like a secondary pull to that would be some of my favorites at the moment would be an EZ bar underhand row, or a dual arm dumbbell row, or a barbell bent over row, or a T-bar row. That would be secondary. Tertiary to that would be some form of vertical pull. My favorites involve a medium grip pronated mag pull down. I really like those. Or the semi-supinated grip as well is really nice. Then a seated cable row, either with a D-handle single arm pulling into the lats, or just a standard D or whatever you call it, T-bar attachment. I love those. Again, burying them deep into the lats, I think they're a fantastic move. Again, a lot of big backs have been built on those. And then I think a lot of people neglect the upper back. A lot of people have a missing upper back in their physiques, and I think that this is a body part that we should all be training, or a portion of the back that we should all be training. So for that, we're going to take a pronated grip, and we're going to aim to drive the elbows here. If you can see on the video, that's where you want to be driving the elbow if we're wanting to train the upper back. And if you're not taking a row through that plane of motion, a row or a pull through that range of motion, I think you're missing out. Because a lot of people are pulling here. A lot of people are pulling into the mid-back. A lot of people are pulling into the lats. But you don't see many people pulling here. And that's where I think some people are lacking density. And obviously we can control density as a factor. Like, do an RDL heavy and do a deadlift heavy and tell me how your upper back feels the next day. You will feel your upper back be dominated by that barbell or dumbbells. But if you don't add in additional pump work, as Lucas says, pumper sets, I think you're missing out. So yeah, that would be my top 4, which kind of didn't really explain the top 4, but there you go. Some tips on back training. Coco Fit asks, it's rest day on your program, but you feel great and want to train. Would you train? No, absolutely not. If it's a rest day, I take the rest day. Because even if you feel great, like, don't go and train. Because you've got to almost question as to why you're feeling great on your rest day. You shouldn't always feel battered up after a training day, but you should feel pretty trained. You should feel like you shouldn't really want to go and train that day. Of course, psychologically, you might want to train, but I think you should be feeling enough of a stimulus to feel like, yeah, okay, I'm probably not ready to train today. That's the way that you should feel after training, man. Like, so on a rest day, there is no chance I'm going to the gym. Of course, I may do some active rest, like cardiovascular activities, or go for a walk or something, but I'm not training with weights. So yeah, I think you should leave it. Leave it, dude. Leave it. Don't go train. If you feel good, like, just take it on the head that you're feeling good. Maybe you've maxed out your recovery capacities and you've done you've done really well. Like, clap yourself on the back, pat yourself on the back, say well done. Be super ready for your next training day. Fuel up, rest up, get in there again. Hamza asks about online coaching and how to start a business. So, mate, I've got so much content on here. Got a podcast with your own coach, George Osborne, talking all about online coaching setup. And I think it's fair to say that George has had a pretty successful start to his coaching business. Kudos to George, because he's one of those guys that you tell him something and he listens and he just does it. And I really mean that. He's one of those guys that you will tell him to do something and he will do it. And if he thinks that something's wrong about that, or he has a question about it, he'll ask, which is great. So if I have something to say on top of that, is be like George. Be dogmatic, but also be relentless in following what works. Understanding what works for other people, trying to put that into your own capacity, learn from your mistakes. I know George has already learned from some of his, and move forwards. George will build, and I have to, on my word be it, George will be up there very soon with some of the best and be coaching plenty of people. His books will be full. So he will be a busy coach by the end of this year. Hands down, because he's got that work ethic. Ollie, your opinion on massages on rest days, for example, sports, cupping, or chiropractor? I personally don't get this enough, but I do feel like it does offer benefit. I think that you can definitely move through a greater range of motion when you've had a good massage and potentially areas of tightness, tenderness, or inflammation has been released. I think you need to be careful with the degree that your masseuse goes into detail or aggression, because my masseuse and Danny's masseuse, well, actually Danny has a couple, but the one that we've both been to, funny story, we both got a massage off of her the day before we went to New York, and we both hadn't seen her before, so we didn't know what she was like, and holy shit, she like broke us both, and we were on the plane like in absolute bits, like pain, because she literally broke us in half. So you got to be understanding as to how hard your massage therapist is going to go. If they're going to go hard, be prepared to maybe not train the next day, because having a hard massage is like training. It will break you down. So yeah, just be careful with who you pick. But I think they can definitely offer benefit. Have I ever confronted a bad PT who looks like they're going to injure a client? No, not really. I haven't really had many situations like that, because the gyms that I've trained in has been pretty full of good trainers. So yeah, no, I haven't. But I probably wouldn't either, because it's not anything to do with me. It's not on my part, or it's not on my back to defend that client. That client has made a decision to take on board that PT. And if that PT does something wrong, it's on their ass. So, and maybe, perhaps, their exercise that they look like they're doing is actually something that they should be doing. Because, for example, like look up Eugene Teo on Instagram, and then look up some of his activation drills. And yeah, while some of it maybe I don't agree with at all, some of it is actually quite applicable. And if you saw a client, a PT, taking a client through some of those drills, which you probably wouldn't because they're fairly advanced, but if you saw a client doing that, you'd probably think, I need to stop that person because he looks like he's going insane. But actually, they might be offering benefits. So don't be quick to judge, because sometimes people might be doing something that looks really silly, but actually offers quite a bit of benefit. So we'll see. Final question I'm going to take for today, and I'm really sorry because literally I've got quite a few left. I'm really sorry about that, but yeah, I'm just gonna have to take one more and leave it. So do you think you need a protein source in an intra-workout shake, or is an EAA, electrolyte and dextrin enough? So an EAA will, to a degree, based on the amount that you have, it will elicit a slight muscle protein synthesis response. But if you want to max out the MPS spike that you get from the protein source, I would say that you need a whole protein. So a hydro whey, like a casein hydro, Pepto Pro. These are great sources that would digest well with most people and elicit the greatest degree of muscle protein synthesis response, thus preventing the chances of muscle protein breakdown whilst we train. So if you're training for a decent time period and you really want to maximize and fully peak out your benefits from a recovery standpoint, I would say that adding in a whole protein into your intra-workout shake is pretty much a must. It's pretty much most of my client protocols. If they can't afford a Pepto Pro, I usually go for an unflavored whey isolate. Usually most people can afford that. So yeah, there's one more question here that I do want to kind of answer, so sorry. I said not one more, but I will do it. So Watty asked, within the UK DFBA, what show had the best atmosphere that you covered last year? That's a good question. I would say that all the qualifiers are very similar. The last qualifier, the rugby show, was pretty sick. It had a lot of really good people in it. And unfortunately, when you're at that qualifier, it kind of sucks because you're at the top end and people are wanting to qualify. And sometimes you don't get your qualification because you're at the hardest qualifier. But the best atmosphere was probably the rugby one. But of course, the finals has pretty much the best atmosphere because you have the best of the best there. And that's pretty much all I'm going to take today, because I'm pretty sure I've gone over an hour. I've done quite a few of these in like different segments because I've had to do it in between check-ins and in between a few consults today. So hopefully this one's been good, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you did like it, please share it on your story. Please share that you listened. Let a friend know that they should listen to it too. I thoroughly appreciate the support on these guys. The day after these go up, I do get a story full of reshares of people listening in. So I love you guys a lot. I really appreciate you listening. Any advice or thoughts on future episodes, please let me know. And I'll chat to you guys very soon. Keep the questions coming. And I'll be sure to answer some more in the future. All right, guys, have a fantastic week. I'll chat to you next week, and I'll let you know how my seminar goes this weekend with Revive Stronger, the Ultimate Coaching Seminar, which we'll do more of later in the year. But overall, thanks again for another great episode, and we will chat soon. Peace out.